All right, hello everyone. This is going to be a short video on linguistic constructions related to sexual harassment and rape culture, especially those used in the media. I'm going to start you off with just 5 minutes of a TED Talk by Jackson Katz, and then we'll look at some examples from the media, and all this will be played forward so that it norms what's going on in the media, and then you can start to make assessments of your homework articles, whether or not your homework articles are perpetuating the type of patterns that we see in these videos and in these examples I'll show you, or whether or not your articles, your homework readings are challenging the things that we normally see in the media. So let's just look at the TED Talk first.
I'm going to share with you a paradigm shifting perspective on the issues of gender violence, sexual assault, domestic violence, relationship abuse, sexual harassment, sexual abuse of children, that whole range of issues that I'll refer to in shorthand as gender violence issues. They've been seen as women's issues that some good men help out with. But I have a problem with that frame, and I don't accept it. I don't see these as women's issues that some good men help out with. In fact, I'm going to argue that these are men's issues, first and foremost. Now, obviously, there are also women's issues, so I appreciate that. But calling gender violence a women's issue is part of the problem for a number of reasons. The first is that it gives men an excuse not to pay attention, right? A lot of men hear the term women's issues and we tend to tune it out and we think, hey, I'm a guy, that's for the girls or that's for the women. And a lot of men literally don't get beyond the first sentence as a result. It's almost like a chip in our brain is activated and the neural pathways take our attention in a different direction when we hear the term women's issues. This is also true, by the way, of the word gender, because a lot of people hear the word gender and they think it means women. So they think that gender issues is synonymous with women's issues. There's some confusion about the term gender. And actually, let me illustrate that confusion by way of analogy. So let's talk for a moment about race. In the US, when we hear the word race, a lot of people think that means African American, Latino, Asian American, Native American, South Asian, Pacific Islander, on and on. A lot of people, when they hear the word sexual orientation, think it means gay, lesbian, bisexual. And a lot of people, when they hear the word gender, think it means women. In each case, the dominant group doesn't get paid attention to, right? As if white people don't have some sort of racial identity or belong to some racial category or construct. As if heterosexual people don't have a sexual orientation. As if men don't have a gender. This is one of the ways that dominant systems maintain and reproduce themselves, which is to say the dominant group is rarely challenged to even think about its dominance, because that's one of the key characteristics of power and privilege, the ability to go unexamined, lacking introspection, and in fact being rendered invisible in large measure in the discourse about issues that are primarily about us. And this is amazing how this works in domestic and sexual violence, how men have been largely erased from so much of the conversation about a subject that is centrally about men. And I'm going to illustrate what I'm talking about by using the old tech. I'm old school on some fundamental regards. I make films and I work with, high tech, but I'm still old school as an educator. And I want to share with you this exercise that illustrates on the sentence structure level how the way that we think, literally the way that we use language, conspires to keep our attention off of men. This is about domestic violence in particular, but you can plug in other analogs. This comes from the work of the feminist linguist Julia Penelope. It starts with a very basic English sentence. John beat Mary. That's a good English sentence. John is the subject, beat is the verb, Mary is the object. Good sentence. Now we're going to move to the second sentence, which says the same thing in the passive voice. Mary was beaten by John. And now a whole lot has happened in one sentence. We've gone from John beat Mary to Mary was beaten by John. We've shifted our focus in one sentence from John to Mary. And you can see John is very close to the end of the sentence, well, close to dropping off the map of our psychic plane. The third sentence, John is dropped, and we have Mary was beaten, and now it's all about Mary. We're not even thinking about John. It's totally focused on Mary. Over the past generation, the term we've used synonymous with beaten is battered. So we have Mary was battered. And the final sentence in this sequence, flowing from the others, is Mary is a battered woman. So now Mary's very identity, Mary is a battered woman, is what was done to her by John in the first instance. But we've demonstrated that John has long ago left the conversation. Now, those of us who work in domestic and sexual violence field know that victim blaming is pervasive in this realm, which is to say blaming the person to whom something was done rather than the person who did it. And we say things like, why do these women go out with these men? Why are they attracted to these men? Why do they keep going back? What was she wearing at that party? What a stupid thing to do. Why was she drinking with that group of guys in that hotel room? This is victim blaming. And there are numerous reasons for it, but one of them is that our whole cognitive structure is set up to blame victims. This is all unconscious. Our whole cognitive structure is set up to ask questions about women and women's choices and what they're doing, thinking, and wearing. And I'm not going to shout down people who ask questions about women. Okay, it's a legitimate thing to ask. But let's be clear, asking questions about Mary is not going to get us anywhere in terms of preventing violence. We have to ask a different set of questions. You can see where I'm going with this, right? The questions are not about Mary, they're about John. The questions include things like, why does John beat Mary? Why is domestic violence still a big problem in the United States and all over the world? What's going on? Why do so many men abuse physically, emotionally, and verbally and other ways the women and girls and the men and boys that they claim to love?
All right. So that's a good introduction to the linguistic structures and, of course, to the discourse as well, the various discourses that exist here. We're going to take a look at one more example here real quick from some Swedish newspapers to show that this is happening all over the world. Here is the thesis for what I'm about to show you. The linguistic constructions of sex crimes, victims, and perpetrators in investigated news texts from a discourse analysis use discourses around male and female sexuality, but they center the criminal activity around the female victim. And as Jackson Katz just pointed out, the study finds they use the passive form as well. Let's just take a look at some examples. These are taken from Swedish media. You can see the English translations here. And if you look at all of them, you'll see that they're passive sentences. Here they are. And they conform to either the passive voice that we just saw, or as we saw at the end of Jackson Katz's sentence types, they are linking verb sentences, and we see a lot of linking verbs here too, right? Here's one that's a passive construction. The woman was raped outside. The rapist, the doer of the action, right? The perpetrator, the assailant, not appearing in here. The first two we could look at, also passive constructions, had wooden objects pushed inside. Also by whom, right? The male is missing, the assailant is missing. Subjected to grave sexual assaults and rapes, by whom, right? So we see these things missing. Some, if we want to look at linking verbs a little more closely, she is forced to get naked, complete sentence. But again, the person who did this action is missing here. This is kind of the end of what Katz was showing us. It becomes a linking verb. She is. The woman was raped outside. There's a linking verb. And again, the doer, the man, the perpetrator is missing. And so we see that in all of these, if you want to take a look at some more here. And so this is what critical discourse analysis studies have found over and over and over as they've looked at media coverage. There is a movement, if you're curious, to try to stop this, and there's training now in journalism schools to kind of change this. And so more modern articles, you might find maybe a little bit different writing style, a little bit different coverage of this. That brings us to your homework. Here is the article from your homework. And so go ahead and take a look at this and see what you think. Is this an article that is maintaining these norms of blaming women for sexual assault and rape? Or is this article, once you break it down according to what you saw in Chapter 3, quoting verbs in Chapter 4, the way that people are named, is this an article that is not maintaining but challenging those norms? So see what you think. You'll want to look at the text, and I would suggest you can look at the photos as well, and you'll find some answers. All right, so the rest of what you need is on D2L. So go there to D2L discussion, and I think you have what you need to know what the past has been in terms of media coverage of sexual harassment, and you can see if this is continuing that rather negative tradition or if perhaps this is doing something different. So we'll talk about your answers next time in class. Thanks.